And now I'm going to go full screen. So full screen,
Full screen.
showing properly?
Yeah, looks good.
Awesome. All right, so first and foremost, so for everyone out there, my name is B. Pagels-Minor. And for the people who automatically go, what does B stand for? It doesn't stand for anything. I'm just B. Um, Today we're going to talk a little bit about authenticity and how it can actually be your superpower. And before we start, I want to give a little background on this, presentation. One of the things that's like very interesting about my life is that, I am definitely the person who never expected to be in the position that I'm in my life. And I'm also that person who, had like all the typical imposter syndrome, all the things, all the syndromes that people talk about that they have when they're going to work every day. I was definitely that person. And so one of my mentors was just kind of like, be like, you should actually sit down and think about how you were able to get to a place that, you got over a lot of those things. And what I realized is that it's really through my journey of being a very authentic person. And so, for my actual work, I'm a product manager. And so to get started, I want to go a little bit over agenda. As a product manager, I have this like a weird position that there always needs to be an agenda. I don't care what the situation is. If there's not an agenda, I can't show up. And so I want to talk a little bit about what we're going to talk about today. So first and foremost, either fortunately or unfortunately, we're going to talk a lot about me. Like this is not something I like to do typically, but this is, the presentation and the explanation doesn't make sense if we don't go over a lot of the details about my own life. And then we're going to start diving into some specific tools, methodologies, and frameworks that you can apply to your own life to kind of figure out who you are and how you can develop your own superpower. So, getting right into it, let's start off with where I've been. Because, why the heck should I be talking to you, right? If I don't have enough, acumen to talk to you. So first and foremost, it actually, one of the things that I think is like kind of interesting and great about my life is my very first job out of college. Actually, my very first job out of college was as a consultant, but then 2008, the economic downturn happened, and I got laid off, and I became a barista at Tivana. But then my very first job that I wasn't terrified that I wouldn't be able to pay my bills was actually as a store manager at Target. And I mention that here because so I always think it's funny on people's LinkedIn's where you could tell they've been out of college for like 15, 20 years, and they only have the cool jobs on there, the ones that other people think are cool. And for me, I actually think my job at Target was the most foundational job in terms of helping me develop as a manager and as a people person, right? Because if you have 200 plus employees who are coming to you with a diverse types of issues and diverse types of problems, and then also customers who come in and try your patience every single day, you have to develop a lot of different skills to, be a better version of yourself to be successful at that work. And so then after that, I actually worked at a company called ShareCell. So ShareCell is a company that does affiliate marketing. And it's really interesting because at ShareCell is actually where it was the first company I worked at that dealt with technology. But it was also a very interesting opportunity where, we were a very small startup with less than 25 people. And I was the only Black person. I was the only LGBTQ plus person. I was the only, assigned female at birth person who also had masculine characteristics. And so even though this was this super small startup and every single day they would say, B, you're like so awesome. We would drink together, we would eat together, we were like a family. I always felt like I didn't fit in. And it was like years later, I was talking to some folks and they were like, honestly, like I could consider you one of my best friends, but I didn't really know anything about you, right? Because, you always kind of kept a little bit to yourself. Then after ShareCell, I actually did a lot of work as an analyst for a lot of different marketing companies, agencies, and things like that. And it was really interesting because it was a dynamic change for me because I started, developing my analytical and my, qualitative skills and qualitative and quantitative skills. And so it was a really, really game changer for me because it was the first time that I had to prove I was smart versus just thinking I was smart. And it was actually really helpful to me because once I actually started getting feedback that I was an intelligent person, I was just like, wait, maybe I should be trying to achieve more. And so then I went on to be a product manager for both B2B and B2C companies. So companies like Wyzant, Cars.com, um, uh, Sprout Social, things like that. So, progressively larger startups. And then, Sprout Social actually went public earlier this year and it's now a multi-billion-dollar company. And it was just really a really great experience. And it also was, again, as a product manager, especially, you have to stand up in front of people and make them believe you, right? And if you don't believe yourself, right, who you are, that you're smart, that you're talented, that you're supposed to be there, it's really difficult to make other people believe in your vision. And so I really love the fact my evolution as a product manager is also something that helped me evolve my evolution as an authentic person. And so then I went on to Apple, where I worked on the App Store. It was one of the most interesting and terrifying and most difficult jobs I will ever have. I actually do recommend working at Apple because, building products for billions of people is by far the most difficult thing I've ever done. But it also taught me that when I think about who I am as a person, I actually really just like working for things that are very tangible that make people very happy. And so now I actually work for one of the largest media companies in the world, Netflix. So that's a little bit about my professional acumen, to give you a sense of, how the work that I've done in my own authenticity really has supercharged my ability to kind of navigate and be successful in my life. But that's just the money part of things. So let's talk a little bit about who I am. And this slide, before I start the slide, I want to, mention this idea of intersectionality. And so that's really what I'm trying to capture here, right? Is the fact that every single person in the world is a lot of different things, right? If you're a cis het white man, the number one thing that people are going to say is you have more privilege than everyone else, which is true that you do. But if you're from where I am in Mississippi, chances are you have a lot less access to certain things than a lot of people who may be around you right now. If you are, a Japanese American woman, there's going to be a lot of different aspects to your identity beyond just being Japanese or American or being a woman. And so when I started doing this exercise of like, what are my intersectional identities? What are the things that make me who I am? This is what I came up with. So first and foremost, I'm a part of this, larger, amazing LGBTQ plus community. But then I'm also Southern fried. I'm from Mississippi. I'm super, my wife makes fun of me all the time because like I get really uncomfortable if people curse too much or they're too rude or anything like that. Like it's built into my personality. And it's something that I have to navigate, especially as I'm around, you Yankees. Y'all say a lot more inappropriate things than I'm used to. So I have to navigate those different things. I'm also non-binary and also non-binary and masculine of center, right? And so that's a huge part of my identity. In fact, that's not something that you would have heard me claim until about 2014, which, at that point, I was almost, at my 30s. And this is the first time I was willingly ready to say, oh, by the way, I'm different. Like I'm a trans non-binary human. And again, that's part of the magic of this authenticity journey is that I could also be authentic in my identity. I'm married. I'm super married. In fact, I don't know if there's a day that goes by that I don't mention my wife to someone, which is kind of an interesting, weird thing. I didn't think I was going to be one of those people, but apparently I am. I am super blackety black, black, black. And I stole that from one of my friends, Lexi, because when she walks out anywhere, people could just ask how her day is, and she'll just say, I'm super blackety black, black. And I think that that's something that's super amazing. And it's another example of parts of my identity that before I started this journey, I wouldn't say it like that. I wouldn't go into the workplace and expect them to completely accept my Black identity because, I thought I needed to perform in a certain way or perform in a white way, for instance, in the US, in order to fit in. And so I now, proudly, make sure people know that. I'm also a sneakerhead. Now, people wonder why I put this in, but I literally think it might be a disease. And so I just want to make sure, like, I'm saying this to hold myself accountable to the fact that I am a sneakerhead. And I probably should stop buying sneakers as I actually have, one pair on the way here right now. I was assigned female at birth, right? And so one of the things about this that's super important to me is that it's a big deal to me to be a part of the larger, like, women WMXN community, because, women are some of the most undervalued folks, in the world in terms of, especially when you think about corporate America. Especially since COVID, for instance, it's been something that's really been on my mind, is the number of women who are leaving the workplace to, help sustain their families, and also how we actually navigate that. Right now, I'm from the Bay Area. It's been very interesting being in the Bay, and how that's kind of evolved me. Apparently, nature is like not a scary thing. I mean, my wife is still trying to convince me. We're still taking slow. We're getting there. I'm a Gemini. And it's so funny, when I first put this slide together, I started like looking up like Gemini characteristics, and apparently people don't like Geminis. I did not know this beforehand, which means I might be a little naive. I don't know, but it was just really funny to me because apparently Geminis have a bad reputation, and I think we're great. And I'm a nerd. Like, I am such a nerd. And it's one of those things again. When I was in, high school and college, I was, Division 1 athlete, and I would never have told anyone how much of a nerd I was. I always tried to be one of the cool kids. But the reality is, I'm such a huge nerd, and it's like it's one of those things that, again, I'm so proud to be able to say that very, loudly, now versus, when I was much younger. So I say all of that because, this next quote actually sums up who I was before I started this journey. So I started this journey somewhere around like 2012-ish, right? And this quote completely typifies who I was. Like, I was angry, I was afraid, and I just closed myself off. When I talked about my coworkers, I have all of these people who are from that earlier period in my life where they're just like, I loved you because like I just saw the potential in you, but I also didn't know how to connect to you, right? And I also think that, being a Black Southern American, the first things I was ever told were about how dangerous it was to go out in the world, and how scary people could be because they might not see me for who I was. And so it was this compounding effect where I just really was just, I was afraid of people. Like, I was afraid of like connecting to people and then having them harm me. And so, having said that, one of the things about this journey is that you get braver. And so, I call this my journey to authenticity. And the journey has a few steps. The first one was to do assess. So again, my natural inclination is to be an analytical and logical person. And so the first step to anything is to actually assess the situation. If a building's on fire, you assess the building to figure out, okay, could I go in here and save a person? Or, should I be calling the fire department immediately? Like, what is the level of danger that exists here? And in this same situation, when I started doing the assessment for this journey, I was just like, well, actually, if I pursue this, if I actually humble myself and do this work, there's actually no negative thing that's going to happen, right? Like, first of all, no one's even going to know that I'm doing this work. So, like, it's not like I have to like go give a report card and prove to people that I've started this process. Instead, it's just, this is some internal thing that I've decided to do, and then I can figure out where to go from there. And so, to do my assessment, I actually started off with a SWOT analysis. So a SWOT analysis, if people aren't, aware, is a strengths weakness. It's about assessing your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And so it's a common business school term. And I just thought, like, well, if it works for businesses and people are basically businesses, right? Like, we are our own corporation and we have to run ourselves like a corporation. I could do it myself. So my strengths, and it was really funny because like the first time I did this, I'm actually going to tell you exactly what I wrote down the first time I did this. And it's so funny because like if I did it now, it would be completely different. But for my strengths, I said reasonably intelligent. I'm an extrovert. People seem to like me. I'm really good at getting shit done, and I have excellent social skills. It is so funny because like if I said it now, I'd be like 100% follow through all the time, great accountability partner. So it's like as you go through life, this will evolve, but it's just really interesting to see what the original ones were. And for my weaknesses, I said, lack confidence in my technical skills, uncomfortable with my gender, lack of professional skills, lack of engagement in my work, and lack of follow through. And again, if I were to do some of those weaknesses now, it would just be, unclear about whether I want to continue in product management or if I want to move into operations, um, you know, uh, trying to determine if I want to, move back into the nonprofit world, those types of things. Then my opportunities were to attend grad school, find mentors, read more, attend local events, and find accountability partners. And my threats were really none. And so it's really interesting here because it was none because at the time, especially when I was going through this process, there was literally not a single person who wasn't on my side trying to help me figure out like what I wanted to do, how I was going to get there. And but what's funny is that until I actually sat down and did this exercise, I thought I had a lot of threats. Like I was really, really convinced that like people were like really not trying to help me. But then when you actually have to write it down, I was just like, okay, well, actually, even though I didn't get promotion at that job, he did actually recommend me for this other job, you know, or like, even though I didn't love everything about this job, it actually did give me all the skills I needed to do XYZ thing. And so it was really like, it was a really good come to Jesus moment for me where I was just like, well, I think I'm really over amplifying this stuff. And I need to be a little bit more mature in how I actually approach it. And the other thing about this is that this exercise makes you take the feelings out of the process, right? Because a lot of times we are our own greatest enemy, right? Like we blow up things in our head to the point where we think something exists. And the reality is that it does not, you know? And so this is just about looking at the facts and then taking the facts and taking to the next step. So, when you do that assessment, you've analyzed yourself, right? And so you have to be brutal, but then you have to turn that into an action plan, right? But one thing to be clear here is that as you're developing your action plan, you need to be careful, right? So this image is of an iceberg, right? So one of the things that's interesting about iceberg is that all you see is what's visible above the line, correct? And so the thing is, the stuff that's above the line can seem massive, right? Because your icebergs can be, dozens of feet tall, right? But the reality is they can be hundreds of feet below ground as well. So you have to do that deep dive to go into the stuff that you can't see, and you have to continually pick away at that, right? So for instance, when I did that first exercise, something I don't think I realized was how much my gender, my sexuality, were really keeping me back because I just really wasn't at the point where I could even have a conversation about that. And so one of the things that I do on a regular basis, and I also like something I specifically did after the first time I did this, was I reached out to one of the people that I consider like a teacher. Like I wouldn't call her a mentor, right? So she's a person who really helped me learn the tangible skills I needed to be successful. And we were talking about icebergs and rocks, and she was telling me how we have to remember that a rock is immovable, right? Like a lot of times, a rock, you know, a large rock is so difficult to move. Like, it takes, the most fancy, most crazy machinery in the world to move that rock. And so you never want to be a rock. But at the same time, what we have to remember is that rock actually is completely susceptible to being weathered away by both wind and water, right? And so you have to bring a lot of wind and water into your life to weather away the edges that keep you and prevent you from actually thinking about who you can be so that you can become like the fancy, amazing archer. Like, so it's so funny. When she and I were first talking about this, she sent me this beautiful natural formation in Arizona, and it's like this. It's you could tell that it had been this massive rock, but the wind and the water that it had visited created this beautiful arch, and it's like one of the main places that everyone wants to take a picture at because it's just so beautiful. And she told me at the time, she's like, "Don't you want to be this archway? Don't you want to be the place that everyone wants to be because it has so much beauty in it?" And so that's what this iceberg, this rock is saying, is that like obviously there's so much more here, but if you take the time, you can weather away and make it something that's really beautiful, that's really movable, that can really evolve into what you're supposed to be. And so then once you have that realization, or as you're developing that realization, you have to take action, right? And so what are the action steps? So first and foremost, you have to list out the traits and skills you would like to develop. So one of the things that I mentioned from my list is that I wasn't really dependable, right? So like I was just like, well, let me go look and see like all the coolest people that I know or that I admire. So like everyone from like Oprah or at the time, because like Michelle Obama wasn't Michelle Obama yet, but obviously she would be on my list now, which by the way, I'm a little obsessed with Michelle Obama, but not in a bad way, in like a super good, like I just think she's the most amazing human in the whole world type way. But I was looking at some of the like greatest people I know, like Tyler Perry, all these people, and there's like this, they had some traits that I thought were like super, super amazing, right? So like for instance, they're all known for being like very truthful, for being trustworthy, for being super good at getting things done, for being dependable. Especially for those folks, they're considered like, the parents of so many other folks because they spend so much time giving back. They're confident and they're smart, and so, I started going through that exercise and it's like, okay, I want to develop those skills. But I also started reading a lot. So some of the books that I read and I still go back to all the time are Start With Why by Simon Sinek, Good to Great by Jim Collins, How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie, Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink, and Radical Candor by Kim Scott. The Radical Candor especially was a game changer for me. So I was a person who would always kind of like obfuscate the truth, right? So I never lied. I just never really was honest with people either. And so one of the things that I do is like I am a truth teller now. Like you cannot not get me to tell you all the things because it just makes me feel better. And I also find that by being so open and honest and candid with people, they just trust me more, which allows me to be more successful in my friendships and in my work as well. You also have to develop a squad of accountability partners. So actually, the other day I was at a meeting, and I was like, I think my middle name should be accountability partner. And someone's like, yeah, I totally agree. I was like, yeah. I was like, now I need you to step up and be my accountability partner too, though. And so what that means is that all of this work is for naught if you do not have people around you who will help challenge you and continue to talk to you about your journey and hold you accountable to it. And what I mean about that is it's not someone who's just going to talk on the phone with you one or two times and go, oh, I'm so happy that you're doing this. It's a person who's going to text you out of the blue and say, you told me last time we talked you were going to do this. Did you do it? Right. That's true accountability partner. And it's also true friendship. It's someone who's always going to challenge you and actually make sure that you're kind of being the version of yourself that you told them that you wanted to be. So then grab a teacher and not a mentor to help develop the skills. So a lot of people think this is controversial when I say it, but the reality is that mentors are really so a mentor-mentee relationship is generally driven by the mentee. And so what that means is that the mentor will be pretty passive in the relationship until the mentee reaches out to them. That is not going to work in this type of journey. You're going to have someone who's going to teach you. Like when I think about some of my best, the people who have been my rocks, the folks who have helped me develop the most, they're the ones who didn't say, shoot an email to XYZ person. They were the person who said, hey, draft that email, send it to me, let me read through it, and let me help you massage it so that you can get the response that you're looking for. You know, they're the person who said, you want to be a product manager. Let's do some interview workshops this weekend because I want to make sure you get that job because I know that job is going to completely change your life, right? And so that's the difference between a teacher and a mentor. Like you have to have someone who's going to go through and actually show you how to do the thing and not just tell you that these things are possible. The other thing about that is that a lot of times a mentor will tell you about their journey, but not necessarily reflect deeply about how that could be applicable to you. So for instance, a lot of my mentors coming up, they were from, so a little bit more about my background, I'm from a single parent, female run household, right? And so a lot of my mentors were from two-parent households. And so even that little bit of nuance makes a difference in terms of my background and how I approach things versus their background and how they approach things. So a teacher translates that into something that's tangible for you that you can then apply to what you're trying to do. And you have to set specific benchmarks for success and stick to them. So if you were to open up my reminders app right now, about half the reminders are for things I actually have to do the next week or two. And then other reminders are things I want to accomplish, right? So there's a reminder for like I want my investment portfolio to be at this amount by this day. I want, to buy my next house by this day. I want to, um, provide this much, funding for my nieces and nephews for their, college funds by this day. I want to, lose XYZ amount of weight by this day. And so the reason I mention all that is because it really does make a difference. If you're working towards something, it makes a huge difference in your ability to actually execute on that thing. And so what people often do is just say, like, I just need to get a new job. But that's not really sufficient. You need to define what the job is, what you actually want that job to have, and then actually, put in place, like, in 6 months I want this new job. I actually use that as an example because, when I decided I was ready to leave Apple and to move to a different company, I listed out all of the, things I wanted in my next company, and then I listed out, like, which ones were the must-haves and which ones weren't. And so some of the things on that list were, a place I feel really safe being both Black and trans and specifically non-male, a place that I feel as though I don't have to make difficult decisions, about difficult ethical decisions, right? Like, I didn't want to work somewhere where I felt like every day I had to fight for what I just thought were the right things to do. And so I was really, really fortunate to, land at Netflix because every single thing I was concerned about, they already had, either they were already great at it or they had plans in place to, fix those issues. And so and that type of structure freed me to make the decision to leave. Because, for instance, when I was leaving Apple, people were just like, "You're going to leave your stock. You're going to leave, like, this company's doing so well. Like, you'll be a millionaire in just like 5 or 6 years if you just stay here." And I was just like, it's not worth being a millionaire if it's not completing every check box that I have, because I need those check boxes to be checked for me to feel like I am being a whole person and being successful in my life. So then after that, like, so one thing to talk about in this journey. So this chart here is actually called the Dunning-Kruger effect. So there's actually this idea about innovation and how it works out. So on the, the one axis you have the confidence, and on the other axis you have your field wisdom. So when you actually start off learning to do something, so whether this is your authenticity journey or would you have your first job, like, let's say you're an engineer, you have your first job and you're gonna be like, well, I went to school for 4 years, I know engineering, I'm really good. But when you first start this process, you're literally the ruler of Mount Stupid, right? Because you have the most confidence, but you have the least amount of wisdom. And so then at some point someone goes, baby. I mean, like, that's what I was saying. I was like, baby, you're not really that smart. You don't really understand. You don't know what you're doing. It's okay. And so then you're like, you're in despair because you're like, oh well, I thought this thing was so cool and I thought I was gonna be so great at it, but I'm actually not that great at it. I need to, like, start working on this. And so then you end up, like, going on the slope of enlightenment. So as you gain both, as you gain wisdom, you start picking back up your confidence and you start sloping back up to where you're gonna, like, where you can be successful. And so then you end up in this, like, this, the ground of the, sustainability. And so I love this because when they actually describe this, and I'll actually say the quote exactly. And so the two people put this together are David Downing and Justin Kruger. And so what they were talking about is that all of this process is from an internal illusion in people of low ability and from an external misperception in people of high ability. And so the miscalibration of the incompetent stems from an error about the self, whereas the miscalibrations of the highly competent stems from an error about others. And so one way to think about that is that when you do not see yourself properly, right? So when you're being inauthentic, you are in a place where you are essentially, stupid. Is kind of what we're talking about here. And so that's one of the things that I think is interesting because obviously this particular chart can be applied to any scenario, but I think especially with this journey of authenticity, it makes a lot of sense, right? Because a lot of times, some of the most inauthentic people, I hate to pick on them, but I think a great example is like salespeople, right? So salespeople come off as inauthentic all the time. And so people are usually very down on them. They don't have any respect for them whatsoever. And so actually the best salespeople I've ever met are the people who are just like very real with you. Like they're very authentic people. They're just like, yeah, like this product, I can't guarantee it's gonna change your life, but I do think it's a good product, right? And so there's a big difference in like how that type of how this journey impacts your ability to navigate all these different types of spaces. So this quote I think typifies exactly how I feel, which is, once I reached consensus with my truth and began to practice it, I can finally commit to a life of being successful, right? So again, what does that mean? Right? So this is when after I did all of this work, after I applied these frameworks, I started going, wait a second, like this is who I am. This is who B is, right? I don't need to be anything else. Like I don't need to be performative. I don't need to perform in some way to, like so for instance, I don't need to perform whiteness to be successful in the business world. In fact, if anything, when I was performing whiteness, like performing to that white ideal, I legitimately was the least successful I've ever been in my entire life. And as I've focused on myself and been my own confident self, it's react people reacted to it. And I literally, again, if you'd asked me 10 years ago if I was going to work for a multi-billion dollar company and run huge programs that make billion-dollar decisions, I would have told you you're smoking crack, and crack is whack, as Whitney said, right? So, but the reality is that like this is what happens, right? And so what I ended up doing is I became my own superhero, right? And that's what I think that each of you can do. And so, what does that mean, right? When you think about um, what it means to be a superhero, first, it's this idea that fear is fuel. And so I didn't come up with this one. I won't lie. So Melinda Gates is actually, I read this amazing article that she was talking about, and it was kind of similar because it was a similar theme, I think, that this article was talking about as like I'm kind of talking about here. So Melinda Gates talks about the fact that when she first started working at Microsoft, she was just a kid out of school. She was making these huge decisions, and she didn't understand why Bill or anyone would trust her to make these decisions, but she knew she had to do it. And so she actually used the fear as fuel to to supercharge her thoughts and her processes to help her, just be better, right? So use fear as your fuel. Be patient, but know your worth. And so what does that mean? So one of the things that as I talk to folks as they're kind of evolving in their journey and in their life, is they're just like, well, I just want that job now. Well, the simple fact is there's a lot of work that exists that you do need to have certain skills and certain wisdom and certain knowledge, right, in order to do that work. But just because you're not at the point yet that you can do that job doesn't mean that you should be undervalued in the work that you're doing now. Like, so for instance, when I think about some of the roles I had when I was first starting out, I didn't know, for instance, what should be expected. Like, I didn't know that I was doing extra work, right? Because like they knew I would do the extra work because I was so desperate to like be liked, right? I didn't know I was getting paid less than some of my coworkers, right? And so, I always tell folks like, if you find out that situation, you need to be putting in an application somewhere else, or even in like your friendships or in like your relationships. So a great example is before I came out as non-binary, I was in a terrible relationship, and I always thought like, oh, it's my fault, right? Because like I'm the one who's like complicated and she's not. But I was just like, wait a second, that's not true. Like I'm awesome. Why am I still in this relationship? Let me get rid of this person. Let me go. Let me move on and do something else. And always lead with facts. So emotions aren't important, right? Like you have to have emotions. We're not robots. But when you're actually trying to do a reasonable assessment of yourself, you need to lead with facts, right? Like you need to take it out from, oh, I'm unhappy because this job sucks, to this job is not fulfilling me because of X, because of Y, because of Z. Like for example, there's a company that I worked for, YZ, and it was really interesting because it was my first really intense product job, and in some ways it was really great because it started helping me develop a lot of skills around like the strategy, the actual execution, the project management, all that type of stuff. But they legitimately were, I don't know, it was just stressful. It was so stressful being there. And so I would always like try to like, put everything together, right? I would say like, oh, it just sucks. It just totally sucks. And I was just like, actually, no, I'm getting a lot of good things from here. But I also, and once actually, led with facts, I was just like, wait a second. The thing I actually hate most is that like, I feel like I'm doing so much work and there's no clear path for like what my next opportunity is. So that's really what I was very upset about. Everyone eats. So Issa Rae, who is another one of those people who I really admire because she really understands who she is and she really understands what how the game should be played. And so the game is, both life and in her case, the movie industry. And she talked about how she found that her peers were the actual people who helped her most. And it's because they had this mentality of everyone eats, right? So, like, if someone got an opportunity on a show, they would bring someone else with them. They would be like, okay, cool, like, I can help write on this show. But by the way, my girl is a great actress. Like, she should definitely be on the show. Like, this will make a really big difference if we work together because, like, we work so well together. And so it's this idea that, like, just because, there, everyone can participate in this process and no one will lose out. And so, coupled with everyone eats is this idea of paying it forward, right? So it's really interesting. So as I've gone through my journey, obviously I've taken on, both mentorship relationships and teacher-student relationships. But what I found there is that when you're a superhero, you need to pay it forward not only because obviously you're a superhero and superheroes, wear the cape and they need to, do good things, but it also comes back to you, right? So when I do the work to, pay it forward, I usually learn something from someone. So, for instance, there's been so many times that I've met with one of the students that, like, I'm working with, and they'll say something or they'll have some reference. In fact, I was talking to someone 2 weeks ago, and she gave me this book, and so I've been slowly reading this book, and I'm just like, this book is like freaking phenomenal. I was just like, what is going on here? Like, why is this like, and so it's this idea that it's all this like cycle, this circle that keeps coming back. And then also some of the best opportunities I've gotten, whether it's actually this speaking opportunity, I this speaking opportunity came from someone who saw me speak somewhere else, and it's so funny because like after that talk, so many people had come to me and asked me questions, and I actually just think it's like I'm like all of y'all just like talked about me, and so that's so great, right? So it's this idea that everything comes back. Fire people and things, right? I cannot express this enough. Do not keep things in your life that do not serve you, right? Um, and the thing is, I know it's scary, right? Actually, I was talking to a friend. He has a very fraught relationship with his mother, and so he was talking to me, and he was just like, "B, like, I just really think I need to cut off my relationship with my mother." And I was just like, well, do it. And he's like, you're not going to judge me for that? I was like, absolutely not. I was like, for someone to say they think they need to fire their mother, that's all I need to know. Like, I know this relationship is not serving you. I know it's not healthy for you. You need to be comfortable with the fact that if that person is not going to help you, then you need to move forward and move forward with your life. And then and when I say things, it could be, if you don't like how you look, it could be to fire the mirror or you can fire your diet, whichever one works best for you. I mean, I'm just gonna leave that out there. For me personally, I just buy a size up because I'm allergic to exercise. Um, but like fire those different things. And so what's really interesting about this superhero point too is that this is usually when you start developing into happiness, right? Like you are becoming truly happy because you have done all of the steps, right? So you've assessed yourself, you complete the action plan, and now you're a superhero. And so I always like to highlight what the benefits of being happy are. So it lowers your blood pressure, it increases your self-esteem, you're less depressed, you have lower stress levels, you have a longer life, and you're more satisfied. And I actually got this from a happiness study that was done by Ricky Lawton. And it was just so interesting to me because, they did this over years and they were like, this is definitive proof. And so this is what's one of the most important parts of this process. So now we have here, like, so first of all, I've given you a lot of information. And so I love this quote by Lovia J, which, by the way, if you don't know who Lovia J is, definitely follow her. She's an amazing, amazing, like, blogger, podcaster, national, international speaker. a proud Nigerian woman who will tell you every day that she's a proud Nigerian woman. And Nigerian Jollof is the best Jollof in the world. But she also talks so much about these concepts of being authentic and not being getting rid of imposter syndrome and not judging yourself. And so this quote is so great because it says, never underestimate the power of confidence. If you believe you're the dopest thing walking, you might convince people the same just because you're so headstrong about it as a fact. And if nothing else in this conversation, because obviously this journey takes time, start here. Start here with just walking the walk, talk the talk until it actually feels as though that is your authentic statement. And I also want to say that, no matter what you feel about yourself in this exact moment, know that you're probably one of a part of the top 10%, the best top 10% of everyone in the whole world. Because instead of, just chilling on a Saturday, relaxing, you are spending your time here learning and trying to grow as a person, and that I am totally in your corner. And in fact, if anyone here wants to reach out, send me a message on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is the best way to message me because it's the only way I do pay attention to consistently. You can definitely do that, and we can talk a little bit about what you're doing and what you want to do and how you can get there. And so I always like to, whenever you're doing something like this, I always like to, kind of mess with myself and show some of my earlier life. So this is B over time, and it's so funny because like again, how I pretended not to be a nerd, I don't know. But I wanted to also show this is the before the journey, and this is after the journey. So it's so funny. I've had these like amazing opportunities. So this is last year, a couple years ago when I got to meet Stacey Abrams. This is my wedding, and this is me skydiving. So this is a great example of something that the old me would never have done, and that something I felt empowered to do after I did my authenticity journey. And so now we're going to wrap up the presentation part of this, and we're going to roll right into the Q&A part.
Wow, thank you so much, V. And I think how we'll do the Q&A session is like if you want to share your video and audio and ask in person, that's super cool. Or you can ask in the chat and maybe like me, Mazana, or Adi will read it out. Whatever like you're comfortable with.
Yeah. I want to say, B, thank you so much for doing this. That was really awesome. It was really cool to see all the stuff about your journey. Can you tell me more about Stacey Abrams and meeting her?
Yeah, so it's really cool. So this was in 2000. It's 2019. It was like because 2020 was so long that I keep forgetting that it was 2019 was not that long ago. So there's this really large conference called Lesbians Who Tech in San Francisco each year. And so what happened was so Stacey Abrams was one of the speakers there, but as a part of her like voting rights thing, she was actually there early, right? And so my wife and I had already had tickets to see, like obviously we donated because we're like voter rights, of course we're going to support. So we already had tickets to see her that night. But a few friends and I were sitting there eating tacos, which to be truthful, eating tacos and then meeting Stacey Abrams is pretty much the best. But she like starts walking by, and my friend goes, Stacey, we're gonna need you to stop and say hello. And I'm gonna tell you, like, if you like everything you think you know about her is true. Like, 'cause she's super nice, she's super affable. She's just like one of the most lovely, wonderful humans ever. And in fact, we tried to convince her in that exact moment to run for president, but she's like, no, I got things to do. And she actually literally said that. She's like, I got things to do first. So when y'all think about what she did in Georgia, she was literally thinking of that and telling us in 2019 the work that she was going to do to flip Georgia. And I was just, it's really fundamentally one of the coolest things ever.
That is so cool. I'm so glad to hear that she is exactly what you think she would be. That's really awesome.
Mm-hmm.
We have Mazana with a question. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought I would start off our Q&A session. Any sort of advice on the tangible things someone can do to acquire a teacher and maybe not a mentor? Whether it's like the language used when approaching somebody or who to look at, where to look, any sort of advice on that.
So first and foremost, it is hard. Like I'm not gonna lie, it takes a while. You're gonna go through a bunch of lemons before you get to someone who's gonna invest the time and energy in you. So first, the flashiest person is probably not gonna be a teacher, right? Like that's it's almost always like that. Like the person who's like super loud, who's just like I don't know, like really great on Instagram and Twitter may not be the person that's going to do it. It's a lot of times it's that quieter person, right? Who just like steadfastly has done well in their career and they also just have that desire to give. But I definitely recommend reaching out to people. So it's always easiest to start with people that you have tangible connections with first. So for instance, if you're in college, maybe there's a professor or dean or some other person in the college who might be a good person to start off with because you have a tangible relationship. Then from there you can kind of go out in like circles, right? So like then like you could go, okay, well maybe that professor wasn't the right person, but you can ask that professor, is there someone who has an expertise in XYZ thing? And if so, would you mind introducing me to that person? So that's one way to do it. I've also seen people have success with cold, like emailing, like cold, like LinkedIn requesting. And when you do something like that, you obviously need to have a little bit of delicacy about people's capacity. So, for instance, when people reach out to me, I really love messages where people go, hey, I am X person. I found you through Y reason. I'm looking for Z thing. And I wonder if, we could, if I could grab 15 minutes of your time in the next 2 weeks to ask you these types of questions, right? And that's a good way to start off a conversation to then potentially convert someone into a teacher for you. But again, start off with, I would say start off with your community and then kind of like use your community to start branching off to other levels of people who could potentially be your teacher.
Thank you. Do you have any other questions? Oh wait, no, we don't. We have quite a bit of people.
I don't see any questions in the chat now, but I do have a question. So when you're saying that you need to, when you're doing the analysis of yourself and you need to approach it with facts and not feelings, sometimes it's very hard to differentiate because you want to be like, I'm really outgoing, but then you're like, wait, am I? Am I actually outgoing, or do I just think I am? How are you able to determine that?
So one thing that might be good is to go ahead and expedite your search for an accountability partner, right? Because that's someone who can then you can vet those things by. So for instance, I had a bunch of friends around me who I would just be like, yeah, I'm trying to figure out who I am. Like, am I really that sucky at being accountable? And they're like, girl, like for real, like you do not follow up. And I was like, man, I was like, that sucks. Like I really thought I was better than that. Right. So like you do have to have some people around you that you can kind of ask that. I mean, I even was calling my mother. I was like, Mom, like I'm doing this work and I'm just trying to figure out. And she's like, yeah, she's like, baby, like I love you, but you bad at that. Right. So like you have to have some people around you that you can ask to because it is like I said, now this is something I could do at the so quickly. But the first time I did it, it was so awkward because I just kept being like, am I being ridiculous? Am I over engineering this just because I'm so afraid, for instance, that you know, I'm like some like weird imposter, right? So like there's some a part of that like obviously these are like the steps that I followed, but at the same time, I definitely think of mixing and matching the steps to fit your journey makes sense, right? Because none of this is like you only can do it this way. It's just do all of these things because these are like if you put them all together, you're gonna get some good results out of it.
Thank you. And we have a follow-up on that question in the chat. Do you think there is value in finding both professional and personal contacts to help you navigate the process?
Of course, right? Because especially when you first start this journey, you're not going to feel that comfortable telling someone who's a professional contact some of the super personal stuff, right? And it's sometimes the super personal stuff is actually what's going to unlock the professional stuff, right? So you do need to have like people that you can really get deep and really be vulnerable with. And so a lot of times that's not going to be a professional, but then you still need to have professional because, a lot of your personal friends, like for instance, I don't have until recently, until like the past 4 years, I had no friends who worked in tech. Right. So like, if I were to ask them really deep professional questions, they would just look at me and go, B, I literally have no idea because technology makes no sense to me anyway.
I have a question. So I think at one point in your slides, you showed that like crazy roller coaster graph. So at what point in your career do you think would you get to that like plateau of sustainability?
Well, I will say I'm not there yet, right? Right, because like there's still well, and I also like I keep moving to companies that are more complex. That like so actually, so there's two things. I keep moving to companies that are more complex, but I also keep moving to companies that are working in fields that no one has ever done the work in yet, right? So like we all are kind of stupid because we're all trying to solve the problem of things that no one has ever contemplated before. Like for instance, at Netflix, a great example is they're trying to figure out how to do, how to make hundreds, or thousands of movies and TV shows a year. No studio has ever decided to do that before, right? And then you also have to be able to translate those into, languages that, fit all hundreds plus countries that we're in. So like these are the types of things that are very complex, but at this, and so like we all kind of feel dumb, and also like we try things and then later on we're like, oh, we really shouldn't have done it like that. Like why did we do it that like that? But that's cool though. Like so like the one thing I should say is I'm not sure if I ever want to get to the plateau of sustainability. Right, like I don't like it, I think I might get bored honestly with my personality. So like it actually is kind of cool that I'm always like there's always something for me to be kind of continue on that slope of enlightenment because like I'm always kind of being fulfilled from that need that I have.
Great, thank you so much. Oh, Jessica asked a question in the chat. So going back to the confidence and wisdom piece, she constantly has low confidence, but does self-confidence just come with time and experience, or are there like exercises and activities that you found helpful to build it up?
Yeah, so first of all, confidence does not come with time and experience. In fact, and the reason I say that is that I have friends who are some of the most talented, most amazing people I know, and they just aren't confident, right? And so what they actually do is they utilize other people, right? So like I think that sometimes when you seem to have an inability to develop that skill yourself, again, this goes to your accountability partners. This goes to asking people for actual feedback. So for instance, one of the best things I did for myself when I was trying to figure out if I actually was good at it as a product manager versus, whether I was just getting along, is I just ask people, like one of the things I do everywhere I go is I ask people like, would you work with me again? Right. And so like when people say yes, I'm more confident, and so that's something that you can do in your own experience. Like you can have people in your personal and your professional life and you can just ask them like, do I do a good job? Right. Like so if you're not confident and then you say, do I do a good job? And they say yes, you're just like, well, even though I'm not confident, they think I'm doing a good job. Right. So again, if you don't have an internal skill, sometimes it's better to look from an external, a reliable external resource though, right? Because we don't want you to get conned, right? That's what happens with some people. Like the people who lack certain abilities, they'll go out to the wrong sources, right? To seek out that type of like recognition or acknowledgement. So you do need to make sure that it's like, oh well, independently as I look at this source, this is someone who seems to be like a reasonably honest person who would just give me an actual honest answer. And so that's what I would recommend if you feel as though you lack confidence or something like that.
Awesome, thank you. I had a question. You mentioned it briefly, but how do you deal with imposter syndrome? Because this is something like I struggle with it hugely, and I'm sure many other people attending do. Like I constantly feel, especially in engineering, I'm like, oh my God, everyone else knows what they're doing, and I have no idea. So how do you deal with that?
Yes, it's really funny because I don't think it's something that ever really goes away, right? So actually, there's a doc circulating around my company right now where someone actually put together like a doc on how to deal with imposter syndrome at Netflix because Netflix is one of the most highly rated, most competitive companies, and so it's like no matter what you do, it feels like you're imposter syndrome. And again, like literally some of the most genius people I've ever met in my entire life work at this company and they all have imposter syndrome. So first and foremost, know that you're not the only one. I think that's the first thing. Like knowing that you're not the only one, I think is always really good. Like a lot of people feel that way. Secondly, again, ask people. I ask my manager every couple of weeks. I'm just like, do you really think like you think I'm doing a good job? Okay, cool. Like like it's. I'm like, you hire me, you keep paying me. Like I have to believe you at some point, right? And then the other thing that I think, especially when it comes to STEM work, right? Like we're all building for the first time so many things, right? So like in theory, like none of us should really feel like we're imposters because legitimately there's not even a book written for the things that we're going to create, right? So like we are legitimately the future of the world. And so when you think about it from that perspective, it's like, how can you be an imposter when no one even knows what the path is?